What if the Foo Fighters were a ska-punk band? That's the question we'll be asking on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, my name is Morgan Brown, and every week I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these videos is that each week I pick a different popular song and imagine an alternative universe scenario in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I have to hand in order to bring this alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was This Is a Call by the Foo Fighters, and I attempted to turn that into a ska-punk song, so if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster. For me, as someone who was a teenager in the 1990s, it's crazy to think now that the Foo Fighters are one of our longest standing classic rock acts, because in my mind it only seems like yesterday that that first album came out. And when that landed, it certainly didn't really seem like the kind of record that was going to be the basis for a lengthy career of stadium rock, but it's amazing what a few decades can do. I must admit, right off the bat, I've not really kept up with the Foo Fighters. I've barely heard anything off any of their last 20 years worth of records, really. But I was quite a fan when those first couple of records came out. So it was obviously that initial era of the band that I delved into for this week's song. I think it's easy to lose sight nowadays of just how much of a turn up for the books it was. Dave Grohl coming out with this completely self-recorded album that was actually really good. There was a lot of skepticism at the time in the music press. I remember reading an awful lot of things in The Enemy and The Melody Maker where people were kind of quite scathingly talking about Dave Grohl and referring to him as grunge Ringo and what have you. Because to most people, he was just the guy behind the drums in Nirvana, and those of us who were attuned to his musicianship were kind of already aware that he was a pretty great musician. But for a lot of people, the drummer's the least talented member of a band. How is he going to make his own record? So when This Is a Call came out, it was a bit of a revelation, really. And the album that followed it, no less so. It obviously had some similar roots to Nirvana. There was a certain grunginess to it, but it wasn't just a guy from Nirvana trying to keep on doing Nirvana. It was quite a distinctly different sound. It was more conventionally melodic. It was drawing from some different kind of punk influences. There's probably more Husker Du in there. Some of the more tuneful 80s punk stuff rather than that sort of really hard-edged, Sabbath-y, Black Flag-y kind of sound that Nirvana were delving into a bit more. And it was a remarkably fully realised album. And I think if you hadn't known, you would never have suspected that that first Foo Fighters album wasn't the work of a band, that it was just one guy on his own with, I guess, just Greg Dully from the Afghan Wigs coming in to play one bit of slide guitar, I think. And obviously he forms a band to then go out on tour. Obviously the first recruit is Pat Smear, who he's already worked with Pat Smear having joined Nirvana to be the touring guitarist on that In Utero tour. And that immediately lends him loads of classic punk credibility as well, because obviously Pat Smear was the guitar player in the Germs. And then I guess with Nirvana being Seattle-based, he's familiar with what's going on in the Seattle scene at the time, so basically just picks up the rhythm section from Sunny Day Real Estate. Nate Mendel and William Goldsmith, they did the whole circuit, played all the festivals that year, and then when it was time to make a new record, obviously went in to record as a band for the first time. And that second album, I think, was being produced by Gil Norton, who I mainly knew from producing the Pixies. And I've heard conflicting stories about what exactly happened in the session sessions. Definitely read something at the time that suggested Gil Norton wasn't happy with William Goldsmith's drums and kind of insisted that Dave Grohl played the drum parts. But then I've read other things that said it was Dave Grohl himself who wasn't happy with it and made the decision to re-record all the drums. But either way, William Goldsmith basically got forced off the record apart from, I think, one track, and quite understandably under the circumstances, I think, chose to leave the band after that. After which, for the ensuing tour, they ended up recruiting Taylor Hawkins, who had been Alanis Morissette's touring drummer. I think also around the same time that William Goldsmith left, Pat Smear quit the band as well. And so when I saw them on the Colour and the Shape tour, the guitarist was Franz Stahl from Scream, which I was very excited about because I really like Scream. Absolutely great classic Washington DC hardcore punk band. It was a real shame to me that they couldn't make it work with him in the studio. Apparently just wasn't working out in terms of songwriting. By the third album, when they've finally got a stable lineup in place, they've got Taylor Hawkins there on drums, they've got Chris Shiflett, who they ended up recruiting from No Use for a Name, filling that second guitar role, which he's still in to this day. And that's kind of the solid lineup going forward. But by that point, for me, the music's already got a little bit less interesting. I guess from the mid-90s to the end of the 90s, you see a lot of the stuff that used to be actually alternative bebeing embraced by the mainstream, being toned down, becoming more polished, a bit more kind of acceptable for sort of general popular consumption. And I don't know if it's fair for me to say that the Foo Fighters did that with their sound. I mean, their sound was always pretty palatable, even on that first album. It's maybe just what seemed exciting in 1994-95 has become such a mainstream presence and has been taken on by so many other acts who maybe didn't actually come from that underground punk rock place, that by the end of the 1990s I was looking a bit further afield and a bit more underground for something that sounded a bit more real, a bit less polished and a bit less kind of calculated to have mass appeal. In spite of the fact that I wandered away from listening to them, I've never really held anything against the Foo Fighters. If you've got to have mainstream stadium rock, I can think of a lot of worse bands to be fulfilling that position. So good on them really, but it's still highly unlikely that I'll ever check out any of their albums after those first two. And I guess as I was losing interest in what the Foo Fighters were doing during that period towards the end of the 90s, the music that I was mainly going to instead of that was punk rock, alongside and to some extent crossing over with the kind of Epitaph Fat Records skate punk boom that was one of the prevailing sounds at the time. I guess the other big thing that was happening in punk at the time was a real boom in Ska-Punk. I guess the association between punk and ska goes back to sort of the late 70s. Initially there was a connection made between the rebellious sound of punk rock and the sort of parallel rebellion of reggae that came from Don Letts playing reggae records in between punk bands at the Roxy. So that connection was already made from pretty early on in the London punk scene. By a couple of years later, you've got bands emerging like The Specials, The Selector, Madness, who are all playing an earlier form of Jamaican music, ska, but infused with punk rock energy and attitude. So it's not in any way attempting to be a pure representation of traditional ska music. It's a new form of ska for the punk generation. And I guess at the same time as well, I should say, you've also got The Clash, who'd previously already been experimenting with reggae. On the London Calling album, they dip into ska with Rudy Can't Fail. So I guess that's ground zero for a punk and ska crossover. But what they're doing at that point isn't really what you'd consider to be ska punk as we understand it now. That kind of develops more throughout the 1980s. You get more bands kind of investigating the potential of combining these two styles of music. So in the UK, you have the likes of Culture Shock, which grew out of the Subhumans. And over in the States, Operation Ivy, I guess, are the really big one. But then Sublime and the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, the Voodoo Glow Skulls, all cropping up in a similar kind of time frame as well. And it's from those American bands that we really get more of the ska-punk template that still exists to this day, where instead of just taking ska and playing it with punky attitude, it's more making songs that alternate between punk and ska. So you might have ska style verses that then burst into a punk rock chorus, that kind of thing. So as well as the ska having punky energy to it, it's interspersed with bits of more pure punk rock. That sound starts to break through in the late 80s. By the mid 90s, when record labels are looking out for something to follow grunge, they've already picked up on Green Day, so Ska-Punk is back in. Rancid have had a breakthrough with Time Bomb, which is a ska-style song from a largely punk rock album, Out Come the Wolves. So some of these big labels start to see Ska-Punk as a possible kind of next big wave, and a bunch of these bands get picked up by the majors. And for a little while there, every teen movie soundtrack, every TV show aimed at young people always has some kind of skanking punk with a brass section happening on it somewhere on the soundtrack. I must admit, although I ended up seeing loads of ska bands around that time, it was never my favourite sound. A lot of those bands for me, although they had the sounds down really well, there weren't that many of those bands that had good songs. To my ears at least, I don't know. A lot of it just went straight over my head. There are a few bands that I got into. Obviously, like everyone with ears, I enjoyed Operation Ivy. I like Citizen Fish because they're basically just the Subhumans, but danceable. I really like the Dancehall Crashers. They really do have cracking songs. I'm delighted that they've just reformed as well. Hopefully they'll keep that going. But a lot of the rest of it left me pretty cold, I must admit. Fast forward to 2025 and it's pretty damn popular again. A lot of the people who've been wearing their sleeves a bit longer to cover up those checkerboard tattoos have started rolling them back up again. For a subgenre of punk that maybe seemed to some people like it was going to be a flash in the pan back in the 90s, it's proved to be remarkably enduring. But yeah, that brings me back to my alternative universe scenario for this week's song. So my idea is that in my alternative universe, it's 1994. Obviously, Kurt Cobain's tragically passed away. Dave Grohl's in a deep funk, trying to shake his way out of this grief and depression. He decides, I've got some songs. I'm just going to go into the studio and record and hopefully work my way out of this depression through music. So goes in without a clear idea of what he's going to do, just starts recording these songs just because it's what he's been doing for the last several years. Basically starts off recording in approximately a grungy kind of style, and they're coming together okay, but as he's working, he just finds he's getting more and more depressed. It's not helping at all, so thinks maybe all I need is to just have a clean break from that style, totally reset. In the studio, goofing around with This Is a Call, which is one of his new songs, and playing it on the guitar, starts playing little offbeat upstrokes, and that sound, it's like a ray of sunshine through the clouds. Suddenly his depression's lifted, and he realises that Ska-Punk is the sound that's going to bring him back, that's going to lift the depression and give him a new sense of optimism to face the world. So he rearranges all the songs, giving them all this upbeat, peppy Ska-Punk energy, records the whole thing just entirely on his own, except obviously he wants some horn parts, so he drafts in the Dancehall Crashers horn section to lay some horns over it as well, and shops this completed record around. It's picked up by Mike Park of Asian Man Records, who is very excited to hear this new sound in Ska-Punk and invites Dave Grohl to come out on tour with his band Skankin' Pickle. So Grohl forms a live version of the Foo Fighters, and they're off as one of the leading lights of that mid-90s Ska-Punk scene. So in trying to turn This Is a Call into a record that would be deemed worthy of supporting Skankin' Pickle, I, as ever, started by just taking the lead vocal and syncing it up to the grid in GarageBand. Quickly realised that Dave Grohl did not record to a click when he was making that first Foo Fighters album, because the timing is fairly free-flowing. It eases back in the verses, and then as he gets more excited, the tempo kind of ramps up. So it took quite a lot of editing to get that synced up, but I think I just about got there. Programmed some drums on next, alternating between a fairly standard mid-paced ska beat on some sections and then a skate punk double time feel on others, and just mixing up the tempo a little bit and then going to a reggae feel for one verse just to mix things up again a bit more. Played some bass over that. I feel like in retrospect maybe the sound I went for is like a little bit too punky. It's a little bit gnarly and overdriven, but it sounds cool, so I was fairly happy with it. Then I popped on the guitars. There are quite a lot of guitars on there, just because we've got a couple of different sounds, obviously. So the more ska sections, I've got a pair of clean guitars, one of which is just doing the kind of standard offbeat upstrokes, and the other one's playing muted lines that kind of play off each other. And then when we go into the louder, punkier skate punk sections, I've got a pair of overdriven guitars playing the fairly standard skate punky rhythm, and a third overdriven guitar that comes in on some bits, just adding an octave that just adds a bit of extra harmony and texture over the top. And there's a final guitar sound that comes in just right at the very end of the track, adding a bit of twiddly lead over that final out chorus too. And then to add a bit more texture to the ska sections, I popped some Hammond organ sound on there, because that's something you hear in some of these Ska-Punk records, and I thought that would be a nice thing to fill out the sound, because obviously once you lose the distorted guitars, everything can sound a little bit empty, so I've got the Hammond coming in there to just fill up those quieter sections. I also added a horn section, just using GarageBand horns, which don't sound amazing, but they sound okay. So I've got trumpet, trombone, and sax playing some little riffs initially over just the ska bits, and then as the song develops they start coming in over some of the punky bits too, until by the end you've got all the instruments just kind of blasting away, which I thought gave the track a nice gradual build. And then for the video, as usual, the first thing I did was just try and find some good performance footage of the Foo Fighters playing the song around the time it came out. So original lineup, sync that up to the track, and then obviously my track's got horns on and the Foo Fighters don't have horn sections, so had a bit of a search around the internet and found a really cool clip of just the horn section from a reggae band playing a medley of their arrangements. So co-opted that, and I've got them interspersed there being my horn section for the song. I also found a really cool compilation of different people dancing to ska music, so skanking away merrily there, so I interspersed a few of those in between there too, just to add an extra layer of ska authenticity to the proceedings. And then finally, as usual, made a few dodgily mocked up gig posters and flyers, just so I could put the Foo Fighters into that mid-90s ska-punk context as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. It was a nice one for me to do, because it allowed me to revisit a couple of different things that were a big part of my teenage years and kind of bring them together. That was a lot of fun. If you did enjoy it, please let me know down in the comments, and if you could also like and subscribe, that really helps me. I would greatly appreciate it. If there's anything you'd like me to attempt in coming weeks and months, any songs you'd like me to look at, any artists you'd like me to investigate, or any genres you'd like me to try my hand at, please do let me know. I always appreciate your suggestions, and I'll try and incorporate any bits that I can. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week, so thanks very much indeed for watching, and I will see you next time.